At the age of 39. No, hopefully that doesn't.
So, continuing on.
Oh,
I can understand. I think the United States is a pretty great place to live. Therefore, I can understand why people would want to come here. I've been to Honduras. I've seen the living conditions. I've been to rural China. I've seen the living conditions.
Or lack thereof.
Or lack thereof. Honduras was the worst place I've ever been. People were living in houses built out of cardboard. Filth and squalor and poverty.
That's pretty par for course for humans. In fact, we didn't even usually have the cardboard.
So I can understand why people would want a better life for themselves and their family. Now, how do we manage that? That's what immigration is all about, I think. How do we manage people, the flow of people around the world?
Right. Well,
because it is a worldwide problem. You look at Rohingya, for example, from Myanmar, and how they were forced out by the Burmese of the Myanmar army. Because they're Muslim in a predominantly Buddhist country. And
vaguely familiar, and I believe they're still fighting over territory to this day, right?
They're still fighting, but the Burmese, the Myanmar army, which just staged a coup within the last week and threw out the elected government.
Right.
In any case, the army has been systematically persecuting people, pushing them across the border into Bangladesh.
Bangladesh is...
Yeah, that's another place.
Isn't Pakistan an
Bangladesh
acronym?
is a river delta. That's the whole country.
Oh, lovely.
The Ganges and the Brahmaputra rivers converge there.
To Bangladesh. And Bangladesh used to be part of Pakistan, right?
That's correct.
And isn't Pakistan actually like an acronym or an initialism for a coalition of... it doesn't mean...
The name, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
You gotta love geopolitics. We are Pakistan, my brother, but we are all different people. What do we have in common? We hate India. Oh yes, we do hate India. Wait a minute. Bangladesh hates India. Is Bangladesh Pakistan? I don't see why not. And there we are. Some of these countries out in the world, hey, look, if you look at the foundation of any country, you find that it's like the sketchiest, just shady, basically a cartel came in, was like, yeah, I think we'll write some stuff down and oppress some people, and that's how countries get made. It's not a like elegant process. I suppose the most elegant and legal process of any nation was Israel, and unsurprisingly, Israel has like all kinds of problems associated with it and asserting its existence around its neighbors.
Morocco just recognized Israel.
Hey, that makes like 12 nations that recognize Israel.
In the Middle East, no. Saudi Arabia apparently is
getting to start recognizing him.
Yeah, is going to be the next, or soon.
It's and look, there's plenty of things that Israel does to itself and to its neighbors that do not help that situation, and plenty of things that it's just there's no solution to peace in the Middle East. It's not like there's a peace button to push. So long as there are states, there's going to be conflict between states. But I wanted to bring up, without changing gears too much, away from Israel, because Israel is such a pit of conversation.
Well, we were talking about education. We were talking, you had started off about
2A.
Gay rights and...
the Second Amendment.
And that's how that sort of morphed into all the other stuff. But.
Yeah, it comes back to... what I wanted to ask about or talk about was the Second Amendment and the colonization and growth, legal strategies for colonization and growth, and how we ended up with the Second Amendment in the United States. The Spanish claimed large swathes of the New World, but they did not give gun rights to citizens. They only had armed places where there were, garrisons.
Right.
So where the Spanish had garrisons, large populations congregated around, and the Spanish got to keep those areas. But the English had a different idea. They said, if you claim areas of the new land, bear arms in the Queen's name, defend your land, and there you go. And that kind of carried over. That strategy is why we ended up with the Second Amendment, is because that's what it said. Now, it backfired on the British because you have an armed civilian population.
Do you have a copy of the Second Amendment?
I know it by heart. The right of the people to, a well-armed militia being...
A well-armed militia.
Right.
That's how it begins.
Yes, being
It
necessary.
does not say, go ahead.
Being necessary to the security of a free people, to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's what the Second Amendment says. I could have gotten a couple words wrong there.
Well-armed militia.
It says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
The intention. Are you familiar with the Federalist Papers?
I'm familiar with the Federalist Papers. Well, slightly. You're
The
probably...
intention was for what we would call National Guard today.
Mm-hmm.
It was never an intention for everybody to have military-grade weapons. Private citizens, don't forget, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm saying at that time, we still had a huge frontier.
Mm-hmm.
But the intention was for a well-armed militia. Private citizens could bear arms. Of course, they could bear arms, but the emphasis was on a well-armed militia.
Right. Yeah, right. So I believe, if I'm understanding you correctly, the idea is that citizens can provide for their own arms so that they may organize into a militia and defend the security of a free state. That's the general premises.
That's the
general premises.
General premises, yes.
Right. And that we inherited that legal language from the British, who took that as a strategy for colonization, because now the land you're claiming is now backed up by people able to defend themselves, rather than the Spanish idea of the people can't defend themselves, but the garrisons can. They lost a lot of land.
And don't forget, there were frontiers, and there were frontiers all around. There were pirates.
Yes, yes.
On the high seas. There were people on the frontier who had to defend themselves, not only from, or thought they had to defend themselves from Native Americans, but also from fellow immigrants coming across their land.
Of course, they would bushwhack them and animals and all kinds of things.
Yes.
You had to...
So the circumstances were different.
Right. Now, today, whether the Second Amendment is still practically valid or not, strong arguments can be made on either side. I am a pro-2A guy. I believe in my heart of hearts, I believe in 3 layers of gun ownership. There's the personal, the protective, and the political. Personally, you have the freedom to partake in any hobby that you so choose, so long as it doesn't hurt other people directly. Guns are technical and sometimes sentimental. They're challenging. They require a great deal of responsibility. They're oftentimes expensive. It's a decent hobby to get into.
I have a cousin, my cousin in Florida, who I told you about, who has a gun collection. And it is a genuine collection. He showed it to me. He has antique guns and other weapons that he collects.
Right. That's his personal layer of freedom.
Yes.
There's also the protective. The protective layer of freedom has to do with the fact that we're not a nice species. The reality of human existence is that the ability to endure and respond to violence from other humans is a human need. In fact, you still do need the gun, whether it's in your hand or in the hands of a police officer. To put down the gun is foolish for your own survival. You do need it. So that's the protective layer. And then the political layer is that, like, sovereignty is first penned in violence and then punctuated with treaties. Sovereignty goes out of the barrel of a gun. You can't assert yourself as a free people with any bullets change governments so much more sure than.
But now you're
than votes
talking
do.
about a standing military as opposed to citizens.
No, I have to disagree. Of the military engagements that the United States Army has ever been engaged in, we have won every engagement against standing armies by state actors. We have lost every engagement.
We didn't
against,
win Vietnam.
Yeah, that was not a state actor. We were fighting rice farmers. We were fighting people who were hiding in
The
holes.
state actor was North Vietnam
Right.
and the Viet Cong.
State-sponsored, insurgency, kind of. Similar to what we're doing in Afghanistan, where we're losing now. Because of that asymmetric warfare thing that you can't win, especially if you're a standing army. It's very difficult to win out against an asymmetric force like that.
But you were saying.
Right. But, okay, so yes, the ability of people to have access, common people to have access to arms, to be able to organize into militias, whether state-sponsored or not, that is part of asserting sovereignty. Vietnam was able to ward off the United States largely because of its ability to organize a militia, much the same way the United States was able to ward off Great Britain, the predominant military power of the time, with similar tactics. And incidentally, whenever you are warding off a state, a well-armed population will organize into militias. These are not individual actors who go out and, I mean, there are some of those, but largely they organize into militias and they assert their will to not be dominated by an external force.
The first time we met was January 6th. While we were sitting in this room talking,
An insurgency was happening.
an insurgency was happening. They had plans to kill various members of Congress, like Pelosi and AOC and several others.
I don't doubt that they're. I don't doubt that they're.
That was their rhetoric.
Right.
Whether or not they would have done it, I don't know, because they did not.
I don't doubt that in that group of many thousands of people, there were people who were prepared to do that and crazy enough to do so. I don't doubt that.
Supposing they had found, and Vice President Pence was another one who was
Who was on the chopping block, so to speak.
right. Supposing they had, and supposing these political leaders had been arrested by citizens and
Right.
condemned to death and shot or harmed in some way.
That would not be the route that I would take myself, of course. It's not something I would sponsor, but that would be nothing new or out of the ordinary for human history.
That's correct.
We had the French Revolution, which was far more, decades of violence on scales unbeknown, just foreign to us. I doubt that the assertions that, like, oh, I fear for my life, I doubt that there's actual credibility to that. I think that's more rhetoric from the opposition to that. And I see the insurgency as less fully damnable as the narrative would permit. I see it as a failed insurrection. And you're insurrectionists because you failed. Look, if the founding fathers failed, then they would have been damnable traitors. So that's the game you play when you do that, when you try to secede, or when you try to win independence, or when you try to assert yourself. You better darn well win. If you don't win, then you're a damnable traitor. And that's how the game goes.
That's how the game goes.
Right.
Absolutely.
So that, for those reasons, I don't believe it's tactful. And I think anyone with any sense would recognize that it's not tactful to make those plays. And in fact, if you are the opposition to that, you want them to make that play, because it has such a dismal chance of achieving anything. And anything that it does achieve is cause for an asymmetric response from your opposition. So we live in an era where agent provocateurs are on the DIY level. There are DIY individuals who show up at BLM riots to smash windows because they're white supremacists and they want the optics. There are, of course, Antifa that show up at Trump riots to get people to try to be as racist as possible for the perfect journalist moment.
What is Antifa?
Right. So Antifa.
What is Antifa? How do you define it?
Okay, Antifa is actually an exported previous German political party from East Germany called Antifaschiste Achtung. It's sponsored by George Soros. That organization is there is a conspiracy that has imported far leftist ideology from East
My
Germany.
understanding is the opposite.
Oh,
That there is no organization called Antifa. That it is a conglomeration, or it's a cover term for it means anti-fascist, anti-fascist.
right.
That
It's not one or the other. There is an organic, decentralized movement like you're describing. There is that layer. But there's also a layer in the core which is organized and funded and conspiratorial by nature. It's not either or. You're right, and so am I. That group has its heritage from East Germany.
Okay, I've never heard about everything I've read said that there is no centralized.
Right. These people, right?
They may not call themselves Antifa.
It's an imported ideology. I saw it in Occupy Wall Street.
It's a broad term.
Right.
It's not necessarily an imported ideology. During World War II, we were almost all Antifa.
Oh, yes. Right. In de facto anti-fascist.
De facto, that's correct.
Right. But as far as the core of what used to call itself Antifasciste Achtung from communist Germany,
Yes.
Spanning back to like Weimar and pre-Weimar era Germany, there is a rich cultural heritage of this. There are people, individuals like George Soros who have contact with these people, and there is an organized and well-funded conspiratorial effort to take and promote this particular brand. And yes, of course, it grows into also an organic thing. I saw it firsthand.
Yes, there is indeed, but I still don't think there's
Right.
an Antifa organization.
Similarly, with all terrorist groups, there are splinter groups, there are gray affiliations, there are areas of cooperation, support, non-cooperation.
It's not like the Proud Boys.
It is and isn't. The Proud Boys.
I'm going to have to look it up. Let me put it this way. I'm not aware
Okay.
of what you are saying.
I'll have to make the case. You are not going to find it, by the way, reported on in mainstream outlets. You may hear some quacks talking about it, and you may also find disinformation sources of quacks speaking wrongly about it.
I agree.
Right.
Yes.
So, yes, this is the nature of just covert anything, that there is a layer that is entirely conspiratorial, composing of maybe a few hundred to a few dozen people with varying layers. And it is a bit like Al-Qaeda, like the idea that we're going to go to war with Al-Qaeda, where it's like, who is Al-Qaeda? Yeah, there are fighters who would fight, who will shoot at American convoys in Afghanistan, but are they Al-Qaeda, or are they just affiliated with Al-Qaeda? There are these gray zones. And yes, of course, that applies to Antifa, and it also applies to the Proud Boys. My brother's kind of far right, right of me, which would make him extremely right by certain standards. Is he a Proud Boy? No, I wouldn't say so, but certain other elements would say.
Same with my brother.
Right.
My brother's very, very.
So it's not like it is in state versus state action, where there are people wearing uniforms and have serialized names, ranks, and serial numbers.
Mm-hmm.
These are people who may be weekend warriors, or may have stupid idiocy, might change their minds, might be at a Proud Boy rally because they were roped into it because their cousins do the same thing, or they might be agent provocateurs, they might be DIY agent provocateurs. It's so chaotic that it's difficult to tell where these lines are not well drawn. And the point that I wanted
I agree.
The point that I wanted to underline about that situation is agent provocateurism is abound on both sides, on every side. There are people who are sponsored by deep state. There are government actors inside. There are three-letter government agency people who come along to these groups who try to get into inner circles and will just spy on you. Absolutely.
I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah.
I actually read that one of the leaders of Proud Boys was an FBI informant for years.
Sometimes those informants and those agents are provocateurs as well.
Absolutely, I understand.
Right.
That. Yes.
So we have that accelerates conflict in a way that is not manageable long term. It's very difficult to manage peace long term unless maybe one side of this wins out. But that's the problem about asymmetric warfare. There's no clear finish line either. So it's like you reach a state of comfortable repression of one group over the other, and that's about as close to a finish line as you get. That we see it all over, with everywhere. And it's happening here in the U.S. because these division lines have been drawn, and people are now affiliating one way or the other. And I'm a white supremacist for asking certain questions, or I'm a liberal communist, depending on who I'm talking to, right?
I hear you. I've
Right.
been there, experienced that.
It's very difficult to talk nuance to people who want to see the world in absolutes. And most people do see the world in absolutes.
Absolutely.
So it's true.
And this is what we talked about earlier too, about people are self-limiting and they have this herd mentality and
It's
so on and
predictable
so on.
that they do. It's profitable and easy to engineer around.
It is, and people feel stressed and threatened when they're pushed to the limits of their comfort zone. And those limits are rather narrow in most cases. And that stems...
My stepdad calls everything he doesn't like communist. Like
that
everything's
stems
communist.
not necessarily from a low IQ, but from lack of education, lack of exposure.
Sometimes humor, but
It's
but it's like, come on, dude, you're calling Walmart communist because you don't like those communists. Like, no, Walmart's pretty capitalist, but it's I hear him.
very few people are comfortable pushing their boundaries.
Yeah, I would know. I'm one of them, but
Yeah, same here.
yeah, of course,
And I've paid a price for that.
right.
I told you my experiences working at the engineering company in Charleston, where I wrote my personal creed,
Mm-hmm.
and I put my political beliefs, and I took them from largely an encyclopedia article written in the 1940s on conservatism, and my coworkers read it and called me a liberal.
Well, first off, there are worse things to be called than a liberal. We actually this is so terrible. Like, the evolution of ideologies is so aggressive now that you can switch sides without having changed your mind about anything. That's astoundingly disturbing for me to consider. Like, you can go from being like,
You're right, Brian.
yeah.
Yes.
So the freaking we're reaching a point of political accelerationism where it's no longer manageable. The world is armed with over 10,000 warheads that's pointed at itself. There are multiple angles where I don't see a lot of hope for the next 100 years when it comes to unleashing thermonuclear hell on ourselves. Because if you look at how narrow the Cold War was, we're just in the Cuban Missile Crisis. There were probably a dozen or so vectors per day where nuclear war could have broken out. There are multiple angles and currents flowing right now that will produce situations where there are thousands of vectors per day that will go on for decades, which I don't find to be favorable for the next 100 years. Just geopolitically,
When there's that kind of uncertainty, the concomitant corollary, or the corollary of that, is that people are going to become more and more narrow. They're going to become more and more insulated and more adamant in their beliefs.
right. That's
And
more tribalistic.
And more tribalist. And that's self-defeating. This feeds into exactly what you're describing,
Yeah.
and exacerbates the situation.
We don't have the vocabulary around, not vocabulary, but the discussion around today about this. Most people are freaking out about climate change, and freaking out in a cursory, non-genuine way. If they were actually sincere about that, they would be doing something about it rather than trying to chastise each other. We're birthing a new religion over wokeism and climate change. That's where religions make their debut, is on the backs of dying empires. We're doing that instead of discussing the dangers of near certain nuclear annihilation in the next 100 years. So I give us about gut feeling, about a 7% probability of making it past the next 100 years without letting nuclear war fly. And in that 7% wedge, there are some really hard to swallow compromises to get there. Very hard to swallow compromises. You're talking about like systematic repression of one person to the other. When you see two people fighting and you know that there's no end to the fight, sometimes you just pick a winner and you say that person gets their way and the other person to hell with you. That's the way of the jungle. Sorry. Yeah, you might throw away many cultures underneath the boot of subjugation, but at least we're not all dead. That is the majority of that 7% wedge. Nowhere in that 7% wedge is there a utopia where everything works out magically. All of that is hard compromises that we really, really, really do not want to swallow. And not only do we have to swallow them, we have to swallow them in advance, decades before they boil over. Decades before. It won't happen.
You must have read my thoughts.
Right.
I was going to ask you just that. It won't happen. You're
right.
Absolutely right.
So we're probably going to nuke ourselves in the next 100 years.
And I've often thought about the same things, Brian, and I thought to myself, I'm glad that I am my age.
You told me that. That's good for you, but the problem is like Keynes, Keynes is the father of neoliberalism. It came out of his head. And he said, in the long run, we're all dead. They've been dead for 2 generations, and we're reaping what they sow. And it's like, it's a mess. There's no solution to this. Most of the solutions are things that are hard. Like, for example, we have a friction between the right and the left in the United States.
Yes.
One way to keep it going is you have the left win out. You give them what they want, and you crush the right. That's the way we did it before. We've done it before actually a number of times. We did it with when the South tried to secede, we crushed them then. We did it when the Whigs, the proto-conservatives, failed as a political party. We crushed them. So
what do you do when you're in the middle and you see good and bad in both?
You
pick the side that's going to win.
Yeah, you can do that. That's one way. That's not in me. I'm not the guy who ever sides with the oppressor. I'm always the guy who will suicidally throw themselves at some...
Yeah, same.
Right, at some stupid thing. Like, I side with losers. That's how it is. Life is a losing game. No one makes it out here alive. So you might as well, I guess, make it interesting or try to make it a little bit more merciful on the people who are going to lose anyway. But it's also a balancing thing. If you're going to put your thumb on one side of the scale, try to balance it out. Fight for the underdog.
Yeah,
that's why I'm largely politically right, is because I perceive the right wing as being the political underdog. And I perceive the left as being acceleratingly violent.
And I see just the opposite. I consider it wasn't the left that stormed the Capitol.
They did burn down many cities. They did throw firebombs into federal buildings. They did kill officers. They did do this.
Do you consider Black Lives Movement a left-wing organization?
There's nuance to that.
Black Lives Matter organization.
There's nuance to that. Black Lives Matter, at its core, was, I believe, started from a younger black dude in Oakland about having a peaceful and nice neighborhood integration with your police officers. That is not a leftist movement. But this is how the organized left works. They immediately co-opt that and turn it into something else, something perverse. And that's exactly what happened. As soon as the outrage... First off, the outrage over George Floyd and George Floyd's death, wrongful death, is... The nuance of it was plowed over. that outrage sells very well to minority groups. It is news organizations push that angle where they can because that makes their business model stay alive.
But right-wing organizations, news organizations in this country do it too.
Of course they do. Of course they do. It's just the nature of the game. You're not going to report.
I see the biggest threat in the United States from the right and not from the left. This country historically has never embraced socialism, let alone communism. Never. It just doesn't fly in this country. Right-wing
Right-wing cultures dominate?
cultures, thank you, I was stuck on a word. Right-wing culture, thinking, philosophy has always had more appeal in the United States. Now, my family is primarily German, and in spite of the fact that my great-grandmother was Jewish, I went to New Jersey to my niece's wedding, and I stayed with a cousin of mine. And being one of the older cousins, he asked me to go through the photographs of the family and to identify who the people were so he could write on the back. And we're going through the photographs, and what do I find? A picture of Adolf Hitler. In spite of the fact, this is from my aunt and uncle, my uncle's grandmother was Jewish.
And they were fleeing.
And he had a picture of Adolf Hitler. And I'm not surprised knowing my uncle. In his collection. So I took out the picture and I said to my cousin, "Oh, here's a picture of your uncle." And he looked at it and he gave me a dirty look. Among his father, my uncle's collection of old photographs.
The nuance of that gets plowed over too.
And I know that my grandmother was uncomfortable with that because she told me so.
It's very sobering to look at the kind of people Germans were under Adolf Hitler and in
They're the
Nazi
same
rule.
way. They're the same way. Look, my family is mostly German. They were the most rigid people I had ever met. You have no idea how rigid they were. They're all past now. My aunts and uncles and that generation. I went to Germany. I used to wonder where they got it from. I went to Germany for the first time. And I said, "Oh my God, there's a whole country like this."
Germany, and nothing has changed.
We were American tourists, and we were lined up to go to Neuschwanstein.
You know, the Polish will scream at you if you say the Nazis did something better than they say, "No, the Germans did that. It's the Germans," and they're right.
That mentality is still there. They're still rigid as can be. We went through went down the Rhine River from Holland right down into Bavaria before any of the tour guides or people who were...
They're still got that Neanderthal DNA.
We finally found a young lady in Bavaria who was explaining to the American tourists in English about this underground grotto that crazy King Ludwig had built. She was the only one who smiled the whole way.
Really? Everyone else?
Everyone.
German? If you pick up German design stuff, you realize that they're all sadistic and like that. If I don't hear the Jiffy Lube crying from across the Atlantic, Hansen, you are fired! Find ways to torture the American auto technician,
I had
please.
a linguistics friend who was from Germany. And I went to visit him. He taught in Canada. Another one.
Yeah. They're very much like that.
Like,
almost robotic.
Good Lord, what's with you people?
Well,
lighten up, laugh.
Be
more like the Italians.
Yeah.
French.
The Italian fascism didn't last quite as long, or wasn't quite as effective. So what was sobering to me about it's not necessarily playing devil's advocate. It's like examining the fact that what you tend to other is in fact us. people become very uncomfortable when you specifically ask them how many things Adolf Hitler got tactfully wrong. There's about 5 major large ones: Holocaust, invading other countries, gaining power through violence. Those are the main 3 I can think of that Hitler did wrong. It's a minority of his actions and decisions. It's the stubbornness of people to stick with their errors over time, and in fact to amplify them. That's very dangerous. It's a minority of our actions. If you take a very tiny amount of our decisions, if we don't correct them and we're not able to become like General Robert E. Lee, which I think everyone needs to know and study and not demonize. Yeah. Robert E. Lee was the very best decision, the very best example in history, I believe, of people who could admit when they were wrong and to make a 180 degree and go back the other way. That is a virtue that few people have. And when he had lost, and when he was right but lost, right. Robert E. Lee was an excellent man. Very few people will have, and we demonize him today because he was on the wrong side because he lost, right? Because most of what gets communicated isn't right and wrong, it's survival and not survival. Right and wrong are shorthand.
Yeah, I've read the same things about the man, about his character.
He's incredible.
Yeah.
Hitler was not a Robert E. Lee. Hitler was the kind of guy who would make a mistake, misjudge, and keep doubling down. And look where it got him. And look what it did to the world. So we have those same characteristics in so-called great leaders like Stalin, and every aspiring dictator who thinks if it was my hands that were on the machinations of power, surely I could usher in the utopia. Everyone would love me then. Those people that have the inferiority complex, the people who dream of power, right? It's in so many people. And because the nature of sociality is that there's supercriticality and crystallization points or nucleation points, the odds that a nucleation point lands on one of those people with power fantasies that will double down on their mistakes, even if they make remarkably few of them, they will play that power game as much as possible. They will not be a Robert E. Lee or a Cincinnatus. They won't throw the One Ring into Mount Doom. And that is what will damn our species, is that particular thing. Because remember the last conversation about the design flaws in how we evolved and how we're susceptible to propaganda, how we have false positives and false negatives about judgment calls about reality, where we can't, I'm about to throw the thing out the window, where we can't help but emulate other people for, God dang it makes it worse. We can't help but emulate other people because that's a survival strategy. We evolved in bands of 150 people. We assess someone's state, we decide whether we want to achieve their state, and we emulate them accordingly. If someone pokes in a hole and gets eaten by a bear, we don't poke in holes. If someone fishes with a net instead of a fishing pole and they catch a lot of fish, we fish with a net. Well, the problem is that we can become super normally stimulated. If you tell someone the story of the man who poked in a hole and found a pot of gold, that stimulates us and we can't help it. We get sad when Mufasa dies, a fictional story about a fictional lion, and we still get sad. But we respond based on our stimuli, right? So the fact that we can't help that's built into us, that can derail us from reality to these absurdities, and we will not know. We can't distinguish. Our limbic system does not understand the difference between Mufasa dying and your grandmother dying. It doesn't know the difference between the story of the guy who poked in the hole and found a pot of gold and the story of the guy who poked in the hole and died of getting eaten by a lion. We can live in our heads, in our phaneron, in this reality. That's where we live. Or in this dis-reality. That's where we live. We can march ourselves off a cliff like lemmings. We're just absolutely capable of doing that. And there's more and more of those case failures happen, the larger you scale society. The more information has to flow through other people to get to us, the more false positives, the more false negatives we get.
Yes.
We'll find some guy behind the cashier at the gas station and will think down on him because I drive a Tesla or I make $160,000 a year. What could he possibly know? Oh, well, you can talk when you've become a CEO or something like that. False negatives, right? We assess someone's state as undesirable, so anything they say can be thrown out, right? Like you were saying earlier about I can be a bigger asshole than you, and how that involves false negatives, right?
Yeah.
And then false positives. We get conned by a con man. Con man makes us think they're very successful. They do very well, and then they say, buy my shit. And they hose you. I mean, we got conned by a con man on the national scale.
Yes.
With a history of cons.
Yes.
And by the way, the con man has nuance as well. He's not always a con. The best con men aren't always con men. They are incidentally when they need to be. But sometimes works out and works out very well. So when Donald Trump was delivered on my lap in 2016, we narrowly avoided Hillary Rodham Clinton, which was a far lesser of two evils. The strategy and outlook that I took over Donald Trump is that we, depending on whether or not we believe this guy and whether we work with him, determines on whether this guy is going to be the next Hitler or whether he ushers in a great shift in American prosperity. We made him the next Hitler. We could have went with the con guy, supported him. Like we had two buttons here.
Uh-huh.
Do you find this guy to be so unpalatable that you can push this button and make the economy go to hell and the world blows up and he's wrong? Or you can push this button and that unpalatable guy is right and we do very well and America prospers and we correct all these things we're doing wrong and everything right that he says sticks and everything wrong that he says goes away. We picked the other one. We picked everything wrong that he says, that's what we show to people. And everything wrong that he can be, that's what we can encourage him to be. We strip away everything else and we made it a con. We did that to him. We had those two buttons and we picked the wrong button, in my opinion. You should have rode out with that guy. You should have made it more positive. But they didn't. We made it Hitler.
I'm not so sure. I see it more as complementary.
Okay.
His personality didn't change. It got...
No.
But we changed. We became more balkanized, more separate, more antagonistic to those who disagreed with us. We became...
The people on the right, the Trump supporters, did not support Trump for wrong reasons. The people who supported Hitler did not support Hitler because they were evil people or because they wanted to make these miscalculations, right?
I don't understand. I'm going to go back.
Okay.
Did not support Trump for wrong reasons. What?
The people who are Trump supporters aren't Trump supporters because they're racist. That's a misnomer.
I think some of them are.
Of course. And there are plenty.
Because I know the ones in my family.
Absolutely, absolutely. And
In spite of the fact that there were black people in our family.
Finding right. I understand that completely.
And that's my favorite part of the family. That's me.
People who are, the people who are Trump supporters and racist, right? That's difficult to deal with.
Because there are, he appealed to a different set of people, people who were not necessarily all racist, let me put it that way. But whatever he touched, he corrupted. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. I think he corrupted evangelical Christianity.
Evangelical Christianity has been the political whore of America for ever since this country was a thing.
You're right.
Right. So it was
but
already...
I think they bought into Satan, for lack of a better word. They compromised.
I understand. I agree on one angle. I disagree on another. I don't think that Donald Trump had to be a bad guy in history. I think how we kept
Yes.
it, I think he could have been a very, very good and
I
necessary
had
thing.
hoped he would rise to the occasion. I did not vote
Oh
for
no,
him.
it wasn't him. It was us.
He didn't. He could not rise to the occasion.
I disagree. I think. Well, okay. So
Look at who he surrounded himself with. He claimed he was going to clean the swamp, and he did. He got as far as the pond scum, and he appointed them to his cabinet.
right, they pointed at the cabinet.
I mean,
There. Look at. Neither you nor I. Maybe you do. But neither of us have detailed information about what this is like from his point of view.
but he has a history.
Right.
He did not enter politics at 20 years old. He was 70
Right.
or close to 70.
When he entered the political
He
realm.
has a history of being a shady con artist, of lying, of
Incidentally,
manipulating.
yeah.
This is how he's lived his whole life. His niece talked about this in her book, about the history of the family.
That has always been there.
That has always been
Right.
there. I'm from New York. I knew that about him.
But, okay, yes, that's true. That has always been there. But it's also true that he's also been a good person his entire life. He's also built things. He's also stood up for people. He's also
He
been a
has
bold.
not.
Yes, he absolutely has.
Name them.
What kind of characteristics of Donald Trump indicate that to me? His workers at Trump Tower think highly of him. He would occasionally come down at the bar and tip them $1,000.
I never heard of that.
Right, $100. That's the kind of person he was. He was that too. And people are not one-dimensionally evil.
No,
And-
I agree with you.
right.
on that. People
Look,
are not.
my dad's the same way. My dad can also be, depending on who you ask and when you ask them, a total asshole who's a drunk or one of the greatest salt of the earth men. That's the way with people, period. Find me a one-dimensionally evil or one-dimensionally good person, and I will show you the other side of them. There's no exception to that.
I don't disagree with that.
Right.
Was the man qualified to be president?
Yes.
In my opinion, no.
Okay.
No. Now I'm going to agree with you on something else, but give me a chance. Did he rise to the occasion when he became president? In my opinion, no. Now, did he espouse ideas that needed to be espoused? Yes.
Yeah.
On that, we are in agreement. The implementation of those ideas was nothing less than incompetent. He did accomplish some good things. For example, the recognition of Israel by several Arab states, I think, is a major accomplishment.
He accomplished ignoring the American industrial complex's desire for additional escalation in the Middle East. He also accomplished ignoring OPEC.
But he gave them tax breaks, and
That's how you do it. Between giving the tax break and between getting another war, I'd go for the tax break because it's paid in dollars, not blood. So he also...
what makes you think that American industry wanted another war in the Middle East?
When does American industry not want another war?
Damn, you got me.
Right. There's constantly... Listen, here's the thing.
You're absolutely right, Brian.
They of course, anyone who sells munitions or just not even just munitions, people who make toilet paper want more wars. It's everything. Benefits from wars, excellent for business. But he also ignored OPEC's, maybe through his own incompetence, but he ignored the Venezuela play. We were going to jackal Maduro out of Venezuela and get them into OPEC. We had already kind of semi-recognized the new Venezuelan president. He didn't go along with that. Did not allocate to them the political will to put another country into bindings to keep oil prices high. So we saw very low oil prices. Perhaps, I wouldn't write this off from him, perhaps the reason why he did that is because that pressure to keep Maduro out kept the oil prices here in America low. And we saw...
I don't know that you're reading more into
I don't...
him.
He's...
Him. Or his advisors. Or his...
I would be very foolish to think that...
I don't think he had the political savvy to think along. I don't think he's as intelligent as you are.
I believe... I don't think he's cerebrally as intelligent as we are. I think that he has a particular gut feeling he has cultivated over decades that is right on certain things by certain ways. That's how he operates. He thinks consciously, cerebrally, in sound bites, but he's got a great gut. He feels the mood of the room very well. That's how he is. So
and I'm agreeing with you.
Right.
And he knows how to manipulate it.
Yes, of course.
He's very effective at that. He's done that his whole life.
At this point, it's instinctual and innate in his behavior. So, because we're recording, I want to lay out how the American industrial complex works with oil, and what explains what we saw with oil prices.
Mm-hmm.
We are the world's reserve currency for a reason. It's because you need the United States dollar in order to buy oil. OPEC will only trade in the U.S. dollar.
Yes.
What mobilizes the U.S. military is the threat of trading oil off of the U.S. currency. Saddam Hussein thought about trading Iraqi oil on the euro. We killed him. Libya, Gaddafi considered trading it on gold. We killed him. We have done that countless times. That's what mobilizes our army. Okay? So we intervene in Desert Storm for the Kuwaits because Kuwaits were friendly. The Kuwaitis were friendly. They were going to trade on the U.S. dollar. The effect of this is important to note. Let's run through an example. Barbados wants to buy Saudi Arabian oil. It can't do so without the U.S. dollar, so it needs to buy U.S. dollars first. Let's say that the U.S. dollar trades 1 USD for 8 Barbadian. Okay, that might be the fairest possible trade, but let's say there's an outlying market where in Barbados it's much easier to produce and allocate sugar than in the United States. We don't do it so well. Let's say 1 US dollar allocates 1 pound of US produced sugar. In Barbados, 1 Barbadian allocates 5 pounds of Barbadian sugar. We trade $1 for 8 Barbadian. That's 40 pounds of Barbadian sugar we can import for 1 US dollar. That's why the United States is a consumer culture, because we have enormous import leverage from our own currency. It's also why all industry flees from us, because the American sugar producer cannot compete with his own currency's leverage to import foreign. This is why one of the reasons why the topology is such that it's a race to the bottom for corporations to get industry and technology out of the United States, because outlying markets will come to eat your lunch if you don't. Okay, so you are playing the game where you have to keep all these oil-bearing countries continually trading on the U.S. dollar. Venezuela is the largest proven oil reserves in the world. It's enough to satisfy global demand if they really got their act together, and they don't trade in the U.S. dollar. We wanted them out. We could not get Chavez out in decades. We couldn't jackal him out, nor could we marshal enough political will to actually go to war with Venezuela, because that's pretty bad optics. The best thing we could do is we waited out until he died. We waited out until he died, and then when Maduro was taking the reins, we tanked the price of oil by fracking. If you look at the United States oil industry, the smart oil dollars, Shell, Exxon, BP, they are not in the oil drilling business. They are strictly in refining, distribution, and retail, because those frack people, they're going to get hosed. They're going to get freaking hosed when the price of oil gets jacked back up and their drilling permits get cracked down by the EPA. That's what we're going to do. So the reality of any oil-producing country is that they can pretty much the only reason why you start a cartel is because any one of you can supply the entire market. It would be a race to the bottom without the cartel. Mm-hmm. So that's what we offer for OPEC. Okay, the strategy is handover for Maduro. We'll just tank the price of oil, so your nice socialized country goes right to hell because you're reliant on your oil industry and you're no longer profitable. Your giant asset that runs your country, it just turned into a giant liability. Great. Okay, so we're going to try to jackal you out. All right, now Donald Trump does not listen to anyone. If you don't think that the oil industry had advisor after advisor after advisor after advisor advising his military people to tell him to get Maduro out of there, He did enough to appease those people to make it look like he was doing that, but the effect of us fracking wells and producing stuff in Donald Trump brain makes low oil prices in the US dollar. In certain parts of the supply chain in 2019, we saw, in 2020 and 2019, we saw gasoline go negative. There's only so much storage in the supply chain for them to bucket productions of hexane and heptane. If you had space, those oil companies would pay you to take it off their hands because you can't just stop a frack well. We saw that. In Trump's brain, that's how it goes. So he did the minimum he needed to do to appease the war machine that wants Venezuela to go into the US dollar. If you see Venezuela go into the US dollar, get ready because the oil prices are going back up. And the actual dollar value at the pump is probably, if Venezuela goes in there and the cartels get what they want, is probably somewhere between $5 and $7 a gallon at the pump. That's probably what they'll do. Now, we've been doing this for years now, and we don't have the political will to jackal Maduro out of Venezuela. OPEC, all the other oil-bearing countries are now getting antsy. They do not like low oil prices either, so now they're screwing with us. So now Russia's producing, and now Saudi Arabia is considering producing as well. So the American oil industry is going to go negative, possibly. The way now we have regime change in the U.S. No longer Donald Trump, this guy that's not doing well for the oil industry, is out, and Biden's in. And how does the strategy change? The strategy is, okay, forget Venezuela. Let's go back to how it was before then. And how do you do that? How do you do that when America is producing frack wells? Well, like I said before, the EPA cracks down on them. We no longer do frack wells. We no longer do that. The price of oil in the United States goes back up. The other cartel members, they sit back. They stop producing as much, the price goes up. And we forget about Venezuela. We go back to how it was before we were trying to jackal them out, because screw them. And Venezuela gets its feet under it again. And we go and we brood and we say, well, there's always Venezuela that's kind of a thorn in our side. It'll go back to like it was in 2006, 2007, which is why inflation-adjusted price of gasoline is going to be between $5 and $7 a gallon. And that's where Biden's going. We're stopping fracking. We're stopping the Keystone XL pipeline. We're stopping doing that. You think Biden's making these choices? Biden doesn't have the brains to do that. It's the fact that he's a pushover and that the advisors get their way, that's how it's going to go. Get ready. You'll see $5 a gallon, $5.50. That's what the adjusted price is. Once we forget about Venezuela, you'll see Venezuela recover because they'll begin to be profitable again once we hose all of our frack industry. We'll gut those people. We're looking at about 1.6 million jobs that we'll lose for that. And it will suck for us because we'll start net importing again. But we don't care. Trade deficit's kind of how neoconservatism or neoliberalism actually goes. It's not good for the American household or the American family. They will get hosed, but Biden don't care. The American household didn't put him in office. He got put in office by special interests. Dude, there's not a special interest that Trump did not piss off. He pissed off every single one of them. Tech, media, oil, military industrial complex, you name it. They all had it out for him. Why do you think they killed a populist, got a populist out of there? Of course the households voted for him. But they don't have any seat at power. It's just the interests. So now we have Mr. Special Interest Group in there. He's a bumbling idiot that can hardly finish a sentence. Like, he's Mr. Leg Hairs, all right? Tomato soup. I was tomato soup forklift guy. Yeah, he's a placeholder. So it's like the rule of the oligarchy. And it's going to suck for American households and American families. They didn't put him in power. Some bourgeoisie yuppie people voted for him, for sure. A lot of them did. But that's not what did the heavy lifting there. It was an Ocean's 11 job. Yeah, no. Between the oligarchy and Donald Trump every freaking time. I'll pick the guy from Celebrity Apprentice who has a gut and not a brain. I'll pick that guy over the oligarchy because you know what? That guy at least keeps our households solvent and he looks out for the little guy. That's why he's such a bastard. It's because the little guy and the oligarchy in the United States are juxtaposed. Very different visions of the world, goals, what have you. The health of one is the loss of the other. So yeah, that's why between Trump and those people, I would go with Trump every time. And look, he didn't have the right advisors. He didn't have the right people supporting him. Why do you think that was? It's because those people are easy to snipe. If you're a political figurehead and you select someone good, I can character assassin him. I can write a smear piece in the media and get him kicked out. I can have a sex allegation on him, right? Kavanaugh, you pick Kavanaugh? Okay, well, I'm going to make a sex crime allegation for him. Okay? Oh, by the way, you get elected? It's Russia. We did that for years, right? So this effort to take care of the American household, whether eloquent or not, like he's not a policy genius. Fine, I'll yield that point to you. But for strategic reasons, Trump was the best thing that happened in this country in the last, I don't know, probably since, I'd have to go back since Eisenhower. I would probably say that. Probably the best since Eisenhower. Maybe JFK. JFK, I would give JFK allowances for personally avoiding the Cuban Missile Crisis. No JFK, we would have nuked ourselves. JFK is probably better for that reason. But yeah, no. I can't imagine. I can't imagine a populist like Trump losing organically, and he didn't, because we changed the rules of our democracy to get him out. You don't do that because, Joe Blow yuppie family wants to do it. You do it because you're a special interest and you can do that kind of thing. And look, he doesn't have the right people working for him because that's extra surface area. You appoint an advisor or something, and I want you to fail. I will get that advisor smeared so that if you even pull them in, they're already smeared. You're not going to have the best and brightest people working for you, because the best and brightest people who are working for you, who are competent at their jobs, they're sheep. They don't want the heat. They do not want to work for you if you're putting out heat for every pick of yours. So yeah, he got freaking smeared from day one before he was even running. He was supposed to run as a joke. The DNC saw Donald Trump as a gift. They saw him as a free Hillary. But we played a wild card. And then the special interests learned. 2016 was the worst year in history because the special interests made a miscalculation and people voted in the guy from Celebrity Apprentice. And now we had him in the White House. And he doesn't listen to anybody. He has his gut. He doesn't even listen to himself. He has his gut and that's it. Right? But his gut's right. Look, if Trump had stayed in office, that 7% wedge, it'd probably be about 5% wedge. But because I don't trust him not to make a miscalculation, because he would. Maybe we'd have like a 15 or maybe 20% chance of not nuking ourselves. I think a Donald Trump could have been a course correction. If you were able to consistently rob power away from oligarchy and diffuse it about the common people, if you were able to do that, that would give us a lot more breathing room.
I'm not sure he did that.
No, he didn't. He would have replaced another swamp with his swamp. If you had given him all the time in the world, Donald Trump would turn out to be a con man. He's a stepping stone. You want him to correct the course. He's not there because on this foundation you shall build your church. He's a wrecking ball, not a cornerstone. But you have to knock down the oligarchy. That's the whole point of him.
I'm not sure he knocked it down.
No, they knocked him down. They won. The wrecking ball was not big enough. Wrecking ball was not good enough. So he got screwed. And look, that's why I'm giving us a 7% chance, because this oligarchy thing is not sustainable. Because we're going to sell out our country to the CCP. We already have to a large extent. Look, Donald Trump, for as idiotic as he is, he's the guy who walked across the DMZ zone, the DMZ at North and South Korea, to meet with Kim Jong-un. We have peace talks and integration talks in South and North Korea. That's one of the hottest places for nuclear war to break out ever. Ever. It's got decades of surface area for nuclear conflict. And
that was the first time I realized that Kim Jong-un spoke English.
Fluently. He was educated in Sweden. He's been to the United States. He's a smart dude.
I knew he was Western educated. I didn't know exactly where.
Maybe it was Switzerland, but yeah, I believe it's Sweden. It was where he was educated. I mean, he's been to Disney World, for Christ's sake. Yeah, I think it might just be a rumor. But we saw...
I didn't know. So
we saw a president of the United States walk across the demilitarized zone and shake hands with the leader of North Korea. In terms of nuclear de-escalation, that's a pretty good result. We saw an American economy that shifted a lot of wealth and influence away from Wall Street and away from the oligarchy towards households. We did really. Household income, black unemployment went down, household income went up, household wealth went up first time, adjusted for inflation first time, and I don't know, since Clinton? This is before Clinton. Yeah, no, there are a lot of things that Trump, I wouldn't say that Trump did right. Some things Trump did right, but there are a lot of things the nation did right because of Trump. And I'm sad to see them go away. They will not come back with this Biden shit. It's not going to happen. He's not my guy. And it's not who Brian says. Look, if Brian got Brian's way, you'd seen Johnson Weld and then Joe Jorgensen. That's who I voted for. Sorry, Dad. but yeah, I see it as dismally rare. We had this time to do a course correction. We could have and should have taken Trump the right way. We should have made the con man not a con man, not the next Hitler. But we made him into the next Hitler. We didn't. The households didn't. Special interests did. They want him out. They got him out. That's what gets represented in this country, not households. And he was only there originally because those people underestimated him. And then they did indeed. Yes. They had 4 years to never make that mistake again, and they never will. From here on out, and largely, it's been like 80-85% planned, scripted events about who sits in the chairs. It's going to be about 100% now. We, the voting public, will not have the ability to put anyone in there that will win against it. We don't have the ability to course correct. And the way the oligarchy works is a giant club. It's a giant clique. The idea that someone else is like an Elon Musk or someone is going to get in there, no. It's a suicide pact. Literally, like Skull and Bones and Yale, those are suicide pacts you take in order to affiliate yourself with the group. You all do dirt. This is why Epstein's pedophile island existed. It's to get dirt on people. So if you deviate from the clique, we assassinate you, character assassinate you, or we have enough to put you away. That's how it goes. We have a suicide cult running this country, running the world. And no one can speak out about the consensus of the cult. And the cult's consensus are the oldest members who are about to die. Like George Soros is like 95. He doesn't have to worry about nuclear war. That's a 80 years down the road problem. Like it's not good. And the seats that make the decisions, those are closed seats. Those nepotistically go to the people inside the cult, go to evil. They do not go to the Allans or Bryans or that lady there. They don't go to any of those. You can't displace one of these nucleation sites with some supercritical thing. It's a very rigid process by which those seats change place, and they change to social climbers, people who did all the right steps and said all the right things and made all the pacts and whatnot to compromise their souls to get to that seat.
You're painting a very dismal picture.
It's a very real picture.
And my only response is, I'm glad I am my age. I don't necessarily disagree with everything you said, but I don't agree too.
Do you think Taiwan is going to remain independent for the next 20 years?
No.
No.
Donald Trump I consider to be an incompetent buffoon. Now, there are others who are far more competent that could have really effectuated the
They
changes.
would not have won. They wouldn't have won. You would not get them in those seats. Those seats are guarded enough to where you would not get them in. We had one shot with an incompetent buffoon who used to run Celebrity Apprentice in a beauty pageant to get in the highest office of the land, and we had to hope that that guy would succeed in being a wrecking ball. He failed at being a wrecking ball.
He failed at almost everything.
I think he was rather accomplished as a presidency. I'm rather proud of most of the good things the nation did while Trump was in office. Whether Trump was by himself, first off, he is not a policy genius by himself. No one is.
That's correct. I
And-
agree with that.
And him selecting qualified help is a heavily compromised process. They have to get through the heat gate that the opposition puts up.
Yeah.
That deterrence alone makes most people not want to volunteer. So you have a limited selection. of the
Limited selection, and he did not choose the most competent people, and he did not listen to them.
Most competent people would not have done it. And the biggest thing that I agree with is he does not listen.
And that chaos, that there were leaks in the White House. There were people who wrote the book Anonymous. There was infighting. It was just.
There always is infighting in the White House.
This went beyond.
Right.
Because he fired people who shouldn't have been fired in some cases.
He hired a lot of people who shouldn't have been hired.
He hired, thank you. You took the thought right out of my head before I.
Right.
So I still consider him incompetent.
That's the most pragmatic choice that you have if you want to do a course correction for the
If you
next
want to
7
do a
years.
course correction, then do it and get it done. He
Right.
failed.
Right.
Sorry, he failed.
Yes, that's why it's regrettable. And
He was not the man to do it.
no, there was no man to do it. Best chance didn't work.
Worst chance. Supposing he was put there by the oligarchs to
Oh.
make sure that it would never happen again.
He was tolerated by the oligarchs because it was a shoo-in for Hillary, who was their pick. They miscalculated. He got voted in. We don't like Hillary. Now he's in. Now the oligarchs have to get him out. They have 4 years. How do you do this? You employ these tactics that we're very well familiar with.
The tactics would not have succeeded had he not been a seriously flawed individual to begin with.
Of course, if he was Christ on earth, of course he would be able to get.
So I have very little. I'm not a Trump supporter, obviously. I have very little to say good about the man. Not 100% negative. And I can point to things that he did that I like. But for the most part, I didn't like his personality. I didn't like his denigration of minorities, of immigrants, of
He married an immigrant. He
every
hires
one of
minorities.
his wives was an immigrant.
Right.
He was just the wrong person to do that.
I disagree that he was the wrong person. He was the best choice. He was not right enough. And that's why the world is mostly doomed, is because the best choice was not good enough.
The best choice against what? There was no other choice. And he was the worst choice because he was incompetent.
If you had put Hillary Clinton
If you
in the
tell
White
me all
House-
these things that you're telling me about Donald Trump,
right,
that needed to be done, you're describing the oligarchy, and I'm sitting here and I'm listening to you, not disagreeing. I didn't say a single thing to stop you or to add 2 cents to it.
I appreciate it.
Oh, no, because I don't disagree with you.
Right.
But if you're going to do that, God, put somebody in there who's going to get it done.
And I would agree with you. If I saw that as a possibility, the seats are too guarded to put someone who would actually do that in there. And even if you did, okay, say you put you or me or your friendly pastor or the right person in there, the same tactics can make those people fail too. The same heat barrier, the same selection of a minority.
Not necessarily so. And there's a person in history who proved it.
Who's that?
Machiavelli. You have to know how to outsmart.
Maybe so. And we need a Machiavelli.
Yeah, I'm not saying he has to be nice.
Yeah.
In fact, he probably
Well, Trump wasn't nice.
No. He had too many personality flaws. He had too many drawbacks. He wasn't savvy enough. That doesn't mean that he's not savvy as a con artist or that he doesn't have certain things that he excels at. They were the wrong skill set.
Right. So what does this person look like, this person that can do a course
I don't
correction?
know. I don't know.
That's the problem, is that I'm getting a square circle.
I'm getting a square circle as well. And you said something that stuck with me about the electability of such a person. And I think you hit the nail on the head. Again, I didn't disagree with your characterization of the things that needed to be accomplished.
Right. So it's system fail.
And a good con artist knows how to cultivate everybody.
Well,
and he wasn't even a good con artist. Again, I go back to Mary Trump's book. She describes the family dynamics in detail, and she was a member of that family, and she interviewed her relatives and taped it. Taped her Trump's own sister denigrating him. I mean,
right.
like Marianne Trump, like.
As flawed as it is, it's still, of all possible solutions, if you're looking for a course correction, it's still the very best thing you can conceivably do. And it's not good enough.
What's that?
No, it's just some people. Yeah, it's definitely not good enough. Definitely not ultimately the right person. He's certainly not Christ on earth. Best shot at course correction? Yeah. Good enough? No. So that's the problem, is that, okay, so given that it's not Trump, what does it look like? Well, it looks like a square circle. It looks like someone who's like somehow flawless, yet
does
also...
a course correction need to be made? I would agree with you wholeheartedly on that. I would agree with you on most of the things that you described as reality in American politics and governance, and still.
Yeah.
Not be pro-Trump.
Yeah. Well, and look, like I said, I'm not a Trump supporter. I am instantly a Trump defender. Listen, what I critique largely is when this guy's in the White House and he's doing his job, the heat fence around him, the quarantine, the dirty tactics, the Russia collusion crap, all of that, all the bull crap that's thrown at him, that's what I attack. I don't support his actions all the time, because there's not many actions of his that I can support. Border security is not very high on my priority list because,
it was a failure anyway. He built a border wall, about 300 miles, 600 miles, whatever it was, I forget. My brother has the exact number. There was a storm, and it blew the wall down. It could be climbed over with a ladder that you could buy for like $100 up at that.
I don't know about $100. How about a rope? That's.
I mean,
And probably also built with illegal immigrant labor. I just want to point that out. Who's going to build this wall? The guys who are trying to keep
The
out.
Mexicans.
Right.
Mexico built the wall.
Heck yeah, man! Look,
He got his wall. He built it around the White House.
Look, the strategy with Mexico is just not the idea that we're going to like keep the Mexicans out is deeply flawed. You're not going to be able to do that.
And nor do you want to. California had an experiment a while back.
Integration with Mexico makes the most sense.
They said, okay, farmers, do not hire any
Price of everything.
non-Americans to do your picking. They advertised, come pick our fruits, come pick our vegetables, come work in our fields,
And
come
no one would
help
do
us
that.
out.
Mexican labor is exceptional.
Two American citizens applied for the jobs. Two. And there are thousands of Mexicans who cross the border legally on work permits to pick vegetables.
Look, I mean, if I was around the Trump admin, right, I could have spun the border security stuff in a way that would have worked out beautifully in about 10 years. It's very possible to do that. I think we had a discussion about fulcrum for negotiating to decriminalize the drugs and so on and so forth. You can spin wheat into gold there. And if it was done, if it was done properly, and you had a negotiating fulcrum, and you were able and willing to negotiate with Mexican drug cartels, and then cut them a deal to integrate back into pharma society, and then integrate more with Mexico, that would work out wonderfully. Maybe that was in the works. I wouldn't rule it out. Sometimes things like that stumble on your lap. They just land on your lap. So we'll never know. The Epstein pedophile island. Oh, bathroom. Well, yeah.